Lael waited a few seconds before he decided to leave where he was and open the door. But as he did it, he saw Ruskin sat on a chair with his head up while Lucas was shaking his head. He was facing the deep teeth bites carved into Ace's nose. The rest of his teammates were with a gloomy face, catching pieces of a broken jar that seemed to be thrown away. Lael was going to ask what happened to Ace when Elena appeared in front of him.
Are you better? You look a bit worse than usual.
Lael frowned and made a half smile.
Thanks for the compliment. I'm better, thanks. What happened to him?
Some goddamn prisoner. Nothing to be worried about.
Ace replied, waving his hand.
I thought you were going to lunch.
Lael Aiken looked toward his mates, but they were facing down, already minding their own business. With a fast move, Ace stood up, making Lucas protest with a grunt.
I almost forgot. Carver phoned me before I arrived. He wanted us to come along to the new crime scene.
He added as he was staring at Julian and Lael and balancing his arms forwards and backwards, with a blank expression on his face, like nothing has ever happened.
We must head there now.
Julian and Lael exchanged confused glances. The second one looked at Ace.
But, what about the case we're already working on?
He said that one would go to Harvey's team, as they have nothing better to do.
Jefferson looked towards him with a scorned countenance. Ace was disliked by everyone there.
That's not how things are done. And Carver usually informs us all with the address. Why hasn't he done it now?
Ace Ruskin smirked and stared at him with a face that said, I'm glad you asked.
Well, that part's pretty simple. That's because I'm his right hand.
He shrugged while purposely tried to cover his larger smile. He tried to sound forcefully as humble as he could, although he couldn't cover his cockiness.
What? What do you mean by that?
Exactly that. Or don't you not know what being his right hand means? As it seems, whatever he wants or needs, I'll be the one who helps first.
He pointed his thumb to himself.
He was the one who chose me, so basically, I'll be the next team boss whenever he needs to step away from here.
Ace couldn't hold back his victorious smile of manipulation achievement, as he looked like growing taller while proffering every word. He also sounded threatening. Gore took a deep breath along with Aiken, who was getting tired with everything that was going on lately. Lael knew that their team and the Bureau in general didn't always follow the rules, and they were criticized by that many times. But at the same time, 75% of the cases were solved due to that. So those critiques usually were absolved.
However, since this Ruskin kid showed up, it's been complete confusion.
He only nodded while grabbing his notebook, keys, wallet, plus a suitcase with important items. He knew that fighting against him without having a proper plan wouldn't be worth it.
Let's go then. We don't want this place to evaporate.
He looked at Gore with a comprehensive look that showed that it wasn't worth to discuss any further than that. Julian nodded and sighed, copying Lael's movements. Ace's face was already expressionless. He put his left hand in his pocket and his right hand up while he gestured to follow me. Both inspectors followed him and Lucas down to the car parking until they stopped in front of a black BMW M4. Lucas opened the door and pulled a small sheet of paper with something written in there and gave it to Lael.
Oh, right. There's the address that was sent to me. I believe you need to take at least another car, so I'm going to hit the road. See you there.
Lucas opened the back seat door and Ruskin got inside the car. He smiled to the detectives as he got inside the car too and drove it to the exit.
What's going on?
Lael only saw that dangerous countenance twice since he began to work there, and it never was a good sign. The first time was when the former director of them started to point his fingers towards Gore, blaming him for stealing money from the investigation bureau, which lately was proven that it was the old director who was doing it. The second time was when he broke up with his longtime girlfriend. Both the situations forced him to make triple efforts on work, and both times he ended up having to take 3 days off to be able to recover. No one knows what was going on inside his head. Lael put carefully a hand on his shoulder as he told him the importance of their work. He also added that it might have been a logical explanation behind all of it. Julian nodded and sighed, beginning to get back to normal.
I guess it's better if you drive this time.
Julian smiled as he began to walk towards his car, an Opel Corsa C. Aiken chuckled and nodded. After 20 minutes, the two detectives arrived to the address that was sent by Ace, who was now talking with Adam Carver. The place they arrived was what it seemed an abandoned small house, which white painting was now decaying along with some of the structures that supported it. Its grass was mostly dead or lacking in a few parts. There was also a dead frog that was starting to decompose in the entrance, with a vole feeding on him. Although many police officers were already sealing the crime place, many citizens along with some journalists were curiously trying to get information about what happened in that place. Death always had this influence on people. As what happens with ants when an insect dies, people also are brought together to the circle of death.
I hope you haven't eaten yet, because, well, it's not a lovely scene to look at.
Carver said with a disgusted face.
Shall we go in?
The three detectives nodded and followed their leader. Adam opened the door, avoiding the dead frog. The vole was still feeding from it.
What a weird thing.
Aiken frowned, looking at the frog. He didn't want to look at it, but at the same time he was mesmerized looking at it.
It is weird indeed.
Ace supported. His face wasn't expressing irony this time.
In fact, I once read that in Britain they found this odd behavior too, which means that this vole, water vole to be more precise, might be pregnant.
He added, while rubbing his beardless chin. He pointed at it.
That's why you can see that this frog only has 2 legs attached. The rest of its body is naturally decomposed, as you can see. The vole only feeds off the frog's legs. It's a really uncommon behavior, and it lacks further explanation, but at least it tells us we might be close to a river.
Aiken thanked him even though he wasn't sure if that even mattered for the case, but the fact they were close to a river and it might or might not be related to the reason they got in there in the first place. The other detectives, however, looked at him for a moment and kept moving inside the house. The degradation inside matched the terrible smell that was present there. There were birds and rats dead for several days or even weeks. That house was lacking in furniture, but not in trash, condoms, cigarette butts, booze bottles, spider webs, and so on. Soon they found 2 dead naked bodies, a woman's and a man's, where once looked like a living room. There was no more living besides the presence of the 4 detectives. The woman's corpse was sitting in a box and leaned on the wall with her right leg dismembered, which was around her neck. Her left hand was also dismembered and put upon her head. Her belly was opened and her intestines removed and placed in a circle involving them. The man whose head was inserted on the woman's now empty belly was laying on the floor with his chest down, right in front of the woman. He had the knots and crosses game carved on his back, with all the crosses filling the gaps in any of the knots. The scene looked like a bizarre painting from a bizarre mind. Lael Aiken had to cover his mouth. He gulped so the food wouldn't come out. Julian copied his movements. Carver had to take Ace out of the crime scene once he was starting to throw up.
Whoever this guy is, he isn't human at all.
Julian Gore tried to get close to the bodies. Aiken nodded and followed him.
Indeed. But this gruesome scene might help us identify some negligence from our murderer.
He finally was able to speak without the risk of vomiting his words.
And perhaps there are fingerprints, hairs, or something. as he was here for a while to accomplish this.
The nausea that Lael felt was getting weaker as he was getting used to that terrifying sight. That was not the time to waste any seconds on the investigation. Carver appeared along with Ruskin, whose face was pale and tired. Lael hid a smirk.
I guess you're not feeling like you are the best right now.